I never imagined a beach house could cost me my daughter. As I sit in this sun-drenched living room, the salty breeze whispers memories of laughter and love. Yet now it feels like a distant echo. I can still see her little hands grasping my fingers, her face lighting up each time I shared a story from my fading diary. But as the years rolled on, those stories weren't enough to keep her close. My daughter traded our bond for a sprawling ocean view and the allure of a life filled with glossy Instagram posts. When she packed her bags, I thought she was just seeking adventure. I didn't realize I was being left behind in the shadows of a past that now feels like a dream. I've searched for comfort in my diary, but its pages hold not just my words, but the bitter taste of abandonment. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell stories no one else does. Stories of grandmas and grandpas the world tried to silence. The sun was setting behind the rows of houses on our quiet street, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I could hear the faint hum of distant lawnmowers and the occasional bark of a dog, sounds that used to soothe me, but now only felt like reminders of a world that had moved on without me. My own home, once bustling with laughter and the chaotic energy of little feet running about, now felt like a mausoleum filled with memories that clawed at my heart. It sickened me, how the warmth of those summer evenings seemed so far away. Now, all I had was the echo of silence that wrapped around me like a thick fog. Each evening, I settled into my worn armchair by the window, observing the lives of those passing by, families and friends who seemed to thrive on the connection I had once taken for granted. I watched as children played catch, their sounds filling the air with joy, while I clung to my thin shawl, trying to stave off the coolness that seeped into my bones. My hands trembled slightly as they held my cup of chamomile tea, a bitter reminder that even the simplest pleasures tasted and felt different when shared alone. I couldn't help but wonder how it was that I had come to isolate myself within these walls, a prisoner of both time and circumstance. The furniture in my living room had started to fade, much like my memories of happier moments. The photos that hung crookedly on the walls, once vibrant with life, had dulled to shades of beige and brown, a testament to a life lived fully, yet now reduced to mere snapshots of the past. My daughter Emily used to adorn the mantel with family photographs, each frame a story of love and laughter. Now, however, the emptiness of that mantel gnawed at me, reminding me of the neglect that had crept in with the years. I could scarcely recognize the woman I had grown into, distanced from the vibrant, spirited grandmother that my grandchildren once adored. The most painful realization was that Emily, the girl I had raised with so much love, had traded our bond for a piece of property that could never reciprocate the affection we once shared. The beach house she had always dreamt of was now a reality, while I found myself living like a burden she had chosen to shuffle off. As she decorated her new escape, filled with laughter and merriment, I slowly dissolved into a shadow in my own home. I couldn't help but resent the way the ocean waves crashed against the shore, a cruel reminder of her abandonment, of her decision to prioritize a material possession over the love of her mother. Perhaps it was my fault for not seeing the signs earlier, for not recognizing the subtle shifts in her priorities. I had been too focused on pouring my heart into my children, putting their needs ahead of my own, yet I had neglected to nurture my own spirit alongside theirs. The days blurred together, filled with solitary meals and creeping loneliness. I felt like a relic from a forgotten time, a book left gathering dust on a shelf. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I wrapped my shawl tighter around me, vowing to confront the painful truth of my isolation and reclaim whatever pieces of my heart still lingered in the echoes of my past. When I look back at the person I once was, I can hardly recognize her. The woman who filled her days with laughter and evening strolls along the park, who tended her garden like it was a piece of her soul, seems like a distant memory now. I was vibrant, full of dreams, nurturing my only daughter with every fiber of my being. I worked hard, not just to provide for her, but to instill strength and resilience in her. I wanted to teach her the value of love, family, and self-worth, noble lessons that I believed would guide her through life like a compass. But as the years have passed, I find myself in this quiet little room, its walls lined with memories of a life now overshadowed by neglect. It's as if the world has moved on without me. I often think of the days when we would bake cookies together, her laughter ringing through the air as she fought to reach the flour that I'd strewn across the countertop. That sense of closeness feels so undeveloped now, a ghost of what we shared. I sometimes convince myself that it was just yesterday, those trivial moments of joy, but reality creeps in, reminding me of the chilling silence that now fills my home, the distance that has grown between us. This new life is a stark contrast to what I had envisioned for my twilight years. My daughter, once my confidant, has become a stranger, seemingly oblivious to the weight of her choices. The beach house she so eagerly traded me for was never a symbol of happiness for me. It was merely a transaction, emotional currency exchanged for something material. I can't help but think that she sees me as an obstacle, an old relic in her quest for a picture-perfect life. Often, I wonder what happened to the little girl who would curl up on my lap, her head resting against my chest, asking for bedtime stories. How did we drift apart so completely that she could see me as a burden to be discarded? As I sit here, surrounded by a life's worth of memories encapsulated in dusty photo albums and the fading scent of lavender from the potpourri my late husband used to love, I grapple with the ache of being forgotten. I never sought the riches or fame. All I wanted was love and connection. But now, it's as if I'm invisible. I realize the world has gone on without my daughter needing me. The phone calls have dwindled to near silence, and her visits have become fewer and shorter. I keep replaying the moment she made the choice, trading me for a home by the sea, her eyes glinting with excitement as she thought of the sunsets she would watch, the waves crashing against the shore. I had hoped she would see the value in memories, in people over possessions. Today, I long to reclaim that lost connection, but my strength ebbs like the tide. My body aches with the weight of loneliness, and I feel like a ship adrift without a sail, longing for the harbor of my daughter's love. I watch as life outside my window carries on, families laughing, children playing, and I yearn for the simple pleasure of sharing those moments with my own flesh and blood. I often sit in the fading light, wondering if she remembers the lessons I passed down to her. I wish I could reach out, bridge this chasm of silence, but the words catch in my throat, held captive by a fear of rejection that has grown like a wild vine. I never thought that the most painful loss of my life would not be the death of loved ones, but the death of a relationship I cherished above all. I remember the day it all began to change. It was a bright, sunny afternoon in late spring when my daughter Claire came over for a visit. She brought a cake from the local bakery, its sweet aroma wafting through my little house. We sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight filtering through the lace curtains, creating a warm glow that felt almost comforting. I thought to myself how nice it was to have my daughter here, laughing and reminiscing about the good old days. Claire was my only child, and I cherished those moments we spent together. But there was an undercurrent that day, an unspoken tension that neither of us acknowledged. As we chatted, I couldn't help but notice her distracted demeanor. She kept glancing at her phone, tapping on the screen as though waiting for some urgent notification. I was halfway through telling her about the tulips I planted when she interrupted me, her voice tinged with a hollowness I hadn't heard before. "Mom, have you ever thought about what will happen to this house once if you leave us?" It hit me hard, the word leave hanging in the air. I had always thought of this house as a warm refuge, not just for me, but for Claire, a place filled with memories and love. Yet that day, it felt as though she was already planning my exit. Over the next few weeks, there was a subtle shift in our conversations. Our once light-hearted exchanges became laden with implications, as if she were tiptoeing around the subject of my mortality. She'd bring up property values and the rising real estate market more often, like a soft suggestion hiding behind words sweetened with concern. I found myself clinging to my routines even tighter, preserving every moment of independence and joy I could muster. Still, her words haunted me in the quiet of night. Were these genuinely concerned inquiries, or a prelude to something more? It became increasingly clear that she had her eyes set on something beyond our bond, a dream of her own that seemed to eclipse the love we once shared. Before I knew it, Claire introduced me to her husband, Mark, during one of our family dinners. He was affable, charming even, but there was a calculating spark in his eyes that set me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was weighing my assets, sizing up my little home as though it were merely a property rather than a lifetime of memories. They gushed about their plans for a beach house, painting idyllic pictures of sunset views and summer barbecues. But those dreams felt like an encroachment into my world. It was as if they were already determining my worth not by who I was as a mother or a person, but by what I could provide for them. I wanted to shake them and remind them that I was still here, a living being with feelings, fears, and hopes. That summer was the turning point. I was recovering from a minor health scare, and as I sat in my garden, tending to the flowers, I sensed a growing distance, not just in conversation, but in the very fabric of our relationship. Claire's visits became less frequent, her phone calls sporadic, and the vibrant laughter we once shared began to fade into polite exchanges. I thought I understood my daughter, but with each passing day, I felt the warmth between us grow colder. I could see the beach house shimmering on the horizon of her dreams. But at what cost? It was as if I had become a mere stepping stone in her journey, rather than a cherished companion. The realization that I was losing her, not to time, but to something far more insidious, began to settle heavily on my heart. I sit in my faded armchair, the one my husband built with his own hands years ago, and stare out the window at a world that feels so far removed from me now. The trees sway gently, their leaves glistening in the morning sun, but their beauty is lost on me. I can hear the laughter of children playing outside, their joy echoing through the stillness of my home, yet it stabs at my heart like a dull knife. It's an irony that those sweet sounds of youth are juxtaposed against the quiet thrum of solitude that has seeped into every corner of my life. I am surrounded by silence, the kind that no amount of background noise can break. My daughter, Helen, once filled this house with laughter and warmth, but now, the echoes of our shared memories seem like faint whispers in the corridors of my heart. I remember the way she used to run into my arms, her little fingers curling around my neck, promising me that she would never leave. But life has a way of severing the strongest ties. The promise she made faded, like the colors in an old photograph. I wonder if she remembers those days, or if they too have become buried under the weight of her aspirations, pushed aside for the allure of her new beach house and the life she believes she deserves. The silence that envelops me tells a story of its own, a tale of neglect that I wish I could rewrite. I observe the mail piling up by the front door, the cards and letters intended for my birthday, reminders of the world outside my walls that I am no longer a part of. Helen's visits became sparse, the calls shorter, and always with an undercurrent of distraction as she spoke about her life, her house, and her plans that did not include me. I wonder how someone can trade a mother for a piece of property, as though love and connection can be quantified by square footage or coastal views. The silence stretches between us like a chasm, growing wider and harder to bridge with each passing day. I try to remember the last time we shared a moment that felt genuine, a time when I felt seen, valued. The dinners we used to have, where we would laugh and talk about everything and nothing, have been replaced by awkward exchanges over hurried cups of coffee. I can almost hear the clinking of forks against plates as we used to enjoy our favorite meals together. Now, I find myself eating alone, the taste of food dull without her chatter to accompany it. I cling to these bittersweet memories, but they twist into knots of regret, reminders of how easily relationships can fray when one person chooses ambition over family. In my heart, I carry a fear that with each passing moment, I am fading from her life, becoming a mere afterthought in a story that no longer includes me. I dream of reaching out, of telling her how much I miss her, but the silence has grown so loud that I can hardly find the words. Instead, I sit and write, pouring my thoughts into this diary, my only confidant. The pen glides across the page as I spill my heart out, a desperate plea for understanding, for connection. But will she ever read these words? Or will they too be lost, like so many moments we once shared, forgotten in exchange for a beach house that whispers of life without me? I remember the day it happened with startling clarity, though time has a way of softening memories that you wish would be sharp and crisp. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, the sun streaming through the glass, warming my old bones. It was on this particular Tuesday that I noticed the change in Lily, my daughter. She walked into the living room, and instead of the familiar smile on her face, all I saw was anxiety glimmering in her eyes. Little did I know then that this was the beginning of a heartbreak I would wrestle with for years to come. She sat down across from me, an odd tension thickening the air between us. I remember staring at her, searching for clues in her expression. It felt as if she were preparing for a speech, her lips pressing together tightly as she rehearsed words that would shatter the bond we had built over a lifetime. Her hands fidgeted, a nervous dance that made my heart race. I didn't know that my life was about to spiral, that the daughter I raised would soon make a choice that would leave me questioning my worth. I braced myself, but nothing could prepare me for what was to follow. "Mom," she started, her words trembling as she spoke. "We've had some offers on the beach house, and I think it might be time to consider selling it." The words rolled off her tongue, but the heaviness they carried would crush anyone listening. My heart sank. The beach house had been a family haven, a sanctuary for laughter, sun-soaked summers, and cherished memories. But even worse was the realization that Lily seemed more interested in a financial gain than the emotional history that home represented. I felt a tight squeeze around my chest, a creeping sense of betrayal settling in deep. When I asked her why she was so eager to sell, I expected a logical explanation grounded in practicality, perhaps the need for repairs or property taxes. But what came next left me reeling. "Mom, I need the money. It would help us pay off our debts, and I could finally afford the things I've always wanted." I sat there dumbfounded. It felt as if she had ripped my heart right out of my chest, replacing it with despair. Was my worth now reduced to a financial transaction? Was I merely a means to an end? The sting of her words cut deeper than anything I had ever felt in my life. In that moment, I realized she was not just seeking to sell a property, she was willing to trade away the very legacy of our family. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I fought against them, wanting to remain strong for her sake. I had always taught my children the importance of family over material possessions. Yet here she was, ready to abandon those values for a piece of paper. I tried to hold on to the semblance of rationality, to explain how important the house was to all of us, the memories that clung to those walls like cherished photos. But with each word, it became increasingly clear. She had already made her choice. I watched her retreat further into her wish for a shiny new future, a future that seemingly did not include me. As I sat there, grappling with this first emotional blow, I realized that the love I had for my daughter could not protect me from the choices she was about to make. I can still remember the day when the world as I knew it began to crack. It wasn't a single moment, but rather a combination of events that forged a new reality, one filled with layers of neglect and betrayal. My daughter, whom I had raised with love and care, ushered in a kind of unrecognizable silence. I had spent decades supporting her dreams, celebrating her milestones, and yet, there it was, an unspoken transaction I never anticipated. The whisper of my old diary resurfacing, like a ghost from a forgotten past, stirred something deep within me. It reminded me of secrets that I thought were buried, secrets that tied me to her choices more closely than I bargained for. That diary was my sanctuary, a small, leather-bound book where I poured out my hopes, fears, and dreams. Each page echoed my struggles and joys, chronicling the more challenging times of my life. I had hidden it in the attic under a pile of moth-eaten blankets, believing its contents were too precious for anyone else to see. After I had let my daughter move into my home, a decision motivated by love and not the least bit selfish, I thought I had provided her with a safe harbor. What I failed to realize was that I had also opened the door to her ambitions that had a cost, one I would come to understand after I witnessed the real estate signs sprouting like weeds around my once lively neighborhood. One autumn afternoon, while the leaves danced a gentle waltz down the street, I found myself wandering into the attic, driven by an unseen force. As I dusted off the old diary, the weight of its pages felt heavier than before. With each word I read, I was taken back to a time when simplicity ruled my heart. It was a time when my marriage had crumbled under pressures I thought I could shield my daughter from. Yet there was beauty in those pages too. a warmth I wished I could give back to our family. But as I flipped through, the warmth was met with a chilling realization. My daughter had taken the very things I cherished and used them for her own gain. The familiar ink strokes felt less like a reflection of my life and more like a ledger of emotional debts. She hadn't just taken my diary, she had taken my story and replaced it with her own. The beach house she coveted became the proverbial rope that entangled our relationship. I remember the day she stood before me, her eyes glimmering with excitement as she spoke of her dreams of sunbathing in a seaside paradise. When she first spoke of trading my care for the dream home, I blinked, stunned. "Mom, we can't keep this place forever," she had said, her tone brimming with familiarity that twisted my insides. I could feel the walls of our relationship begin to crumble just as easily as the foundation of my aging home. That conversation echoed in my mind every time I looked out the window. The sun-kissed beach house loomed large in my daughter's aspirations, casting a shadow over my existence. Now, as I sit here with the diary opened on my lap, I realize the true cost of that dream was not the beach house itself, but the essence of who I was to her. In my heart, I wanted to be that nurturing mother who supported her every wish. But what I didn't know was that my presence was slowly being overshadowed by her desires. The swirling emotions were palpable: anger, sadness, disappointment. But most importantly, there was a profound sense of grief for the relationship we had lost. In my quest to give her a life filled with potential, I had unwittingly become a footnote in her story, a relic from a past she was eager to trade in for brighter chapters. The diary, with its secrets and unspoken truths, may just be my last chance to reclaim my voice. I sit in my favorite chair by the window, the worn fabric soft against my skin. The sun filters through the sheer curtains, casting a warm light that only seems to emphasize the chill in my heart. I often wonder how my life turned into this, how things could get so tangled that I became nothing more than a commodity traded for a fleeting dream, a beach house that they thought would bring them joy. I should have been their sanctuary, their source of love and wisdom. But instead, I became an afterthought, a burden to be shunted aside. I remember the day my daughter Lauren presented her plans to me. The way her eyes sparkled, filled with excitement about the beach house. I should have felt joy for her, but those moments felt surreal. I sat there, disbelief creeping in as she unveiled her intentions to sell my home, the home I had built with her father, the walls that held our laughter and tears. Trading my life's memories for a structure that would only serve as a temporary escape for her seemed no less than a betrayal. I could see the numbers dancing in her head, calculating what she could gain, but could she not see what she was losing? As the days went by, I felt the distance grow, like a taut string ready to snap at any moment. Lauren's excitement turned to impatience, her once warm visits replaced by hurried conversations and barely veiled resentment when I resisted her plans. I was no longer her mother. I had become an obstacle in her path. It hurt more than I could ever articulate, a wound that wouldn't close. I still had so much love in my heart for her, but every word that spilled from my lips felt like a fight she didn't want to have. I tried to remind her of the memories we shared, of the home filled with laughter. Instead, I was met with silence, her resolve unyielding and cold. Even as she moved forward with her plans, I relived the memories we built, like a film replaying in my mind. The Christmas mornings, the birthday parties, the quiet nights spent sharing our dreams. How could she forget? Or worse, how could she choose to forget? I spent sleepless nights pondering where I went wrong, retracing my steps as a mother, regretting every time I put work before her, every time I thought she needed more than a warm hug or a listening ear. Those moments play repeatedly, and I fear it's a loop I can't escape. What did I do to deserve this kind of disregard, traded for a house by the ocean where memories would wash away with the tide? Now, as I sit quietly in my chair, I think about what it means to be forgotten by your own flesh and blood. I feel like a ghost in my own life, watching as my daughter pursues a dream that feels more like a nightmare for me. The ache in my chest is a constant reminder of the love that remains unreciprocated. It's as if the house is built not only on sand, but on the fragments of our once joyful relationship. a structure destined to crumble. I hope she understands one day that the true treasures were never material, but the moments we forged together, the love we shared. But by then, will it matter? I fear it may be too late, and this wound will never heal. As I sat in my modest living room, the sunlight streaming through the half-drawn curtains, I felt a sense of dread I couldn't quite shake. My daughter, Claire, hadn't visited in 2 years. The last time I saw her, she stood at the door, her arms crossed defensively, as she explained how much easier life would be if she didn't have to care for me. I had expected the love of a daughter, but what I received was a transactional conversation about her life choices and a bitter admission that a beach house was more appealing to her than the burden of my aging. I had hoped that time apart would heal whatever rift had created her indifference, but the absence in my heart had only deepened. Then one blustery afternoon in late October, something shifted. There was a knock on the door, and my heart leaped. It wasn't the familiar knock of the mailman or the occasional visitor from the neighborhood. This knock felt different, almost tentative. I stood up, my knees creaking in protest, and made my way to the door, unsure of what I would find. When I opened it, I was met not by the face of a stranger, but by Claire, looking somewhat older and more worn than I remembered. It took me a moment to gather myself. Her presence was both a comfort and a challenge, a bundle of emotions I hadn't anticipated feeling so intensely. "Mom," she said, her voice a whisper, as if she wasn't sure it belonged in the same space as mine. I studied her face, the slight lines etched around her eyes, and I couldn't help but see the girl I used to know, the one who chased fireflies in the backyard and danced in the living room without a care in the world. But now, there was a heaviness I couldn't ignore. "Can I come in?" she asked, and I stepped aside, allowing her to enter this small world I had confined myself to. We sat on the worn-out sofa, as awkwardness filled the air like smoke. The silence was thick, and I could feel the years of miscommunication and neglect pressing down on us. Claire fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, avoiding my gaze. We had exchanged so many sharp words in the past that it felt surreal to share this space again. "I'm sorry I haven't been around, Mom," she finally said, her eyes misting over. My heart softened at the sight of her vulnerability. It was a small crack in the wall she had built, but I was wary. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or simply remorse for what had been said and done? For a moment, I wanted nothing more than to gather her into my arms, to remind her that I still loved her despite everything. But I hesitated, unsure of how to express the torrent of emotions swirling within me. Instead, I cleared my throat and spoke the words that had stuck in my throat for so long. "Claire, it's been hard, not having you here." I could see the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly, as if sharing that truth had begun to diminish the distance between us. But I also knew that healing would require more than mere apologies. It would take time, patience, and a willingness to face the past, both the good and the painful. As we sat in the dim light, the years of silence seemed to fade just a bit, providing room for the possibility of rekindling what had been lost. I had so many questions, a million things I wanted to say, but in that moment, I was simply grateful for the unexpected reunion. Maybe this was the start of something new, a chance to rebuild, not just for us, but for the generations that would come after us. It was a small flicker of hope amidst the shadows of neglect, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. The realization hit me like a slap across the face, and it wasn't the first time I felt the sting of betrayal. Yet somehow, this time, it stung deeper. I stood in the middle of my cluttered living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life I thought was filled with love. The photos of my children, the hand-knit blankets, the little knickknacks that represented years of memories. At that moment, they felt like a mockery, reminders of how easily loyalty could fade when greed seeped into the cracks of family ties. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had traded me for a beach house, an object that could never replace the bond we once shared. "Mom, it's just business. You've got to understand," she had said when I confronted her. I could hardly believe my ears. Did she think money could insulate her from the pain she caused? How could she twist such a monumental decision into something so cold and transactional? My heart pounded as I fought against the overwhelming urge to collapse into a heap of despair. Business? To her, I was simply a piece of property, a liability that no longer suited her idea of a perfect life by the sea. I forced myself to hold back the tears as I searched her face for any sign of remorse. Instead, all I saw was a woman completely detached from the love and care I had poured into her life. I had nurtured her, cradled her in my arms when she was a baby, guided her through her adolescence, and comforted her during her first heartbreak. How could she stand there so unapologetic amidst the ruins of what we once had? The warmth of my heart felt replaced with a cold, hollow echo, and I could sense the love I thought was everlasting fading away like a distant memory. Did all those years mean nothing to you? I choked, my voice breaking like fragile glass. Was I just a convenient caretaker, an option until something better came along? I was angry, and rightly so. I had sacrificed so much for her happiness, always putting her first, but now I realized that I had become expendable. She shifted on her feet, averting her gaze as if the weight of my words had finally seeped into her consciousness. I wanted to believe she was capable of empathy, but the truth felt bleak, and I was left facing the stark realization that love sometimes comes with a price tag. In that confrontation, I felt a wave of emotional release washing over me, unraveling the tightly wound knots of hurt and confusion that had been building for so long. I didn't want to be a victim in her narrative any longer. "If you think I will just walk out of your life quietly, you're wrong," I said with newfound determination. "I deserve more than being on the losing end of your game." The tears streamed down my cheeks, but they were no longer a manifestation of sorrow. They were a testament to my strength, a symbol of the love I still held for the memories we once shared. In that moment, I realized that I was reclaiming my identity, not as her mother, but as a person worthy of respect, something I hadn't felt in far too long. I never thought my golden years would be painted in such shades of betrayal. The sun now sets with a bittersweet glow, a fading reminder of what once was, a time when laughter echoed through our family home, and love was something you could touch, feel, and cherish. My daughter Anna was my pride and joy. I had nurtured her dreams, kept her safe, and poured every ounce of my love into raising her. Now, the very fabric of our relationship had unraveled, revealing a tapestry woven with greed and neglect that I could hardly recognize. It all started with whispers of a beach house, a beautiful cottage that Anna had her eye on for years. I remember the way she'd light up as she spoke of serene mornings by the ocean, the sound of waves lapping against the shore, and the bliss of sandy afternoons. I could see the dream shimmering in her eyes, and I wanted to help make it a reality. After all, I had saved, scrimping and sacrificing to provide for her, ensuring I could leave her something of value. It was with love that I had tucked away a small fortune, not knowing it would become a bargaining chip in a game I never agreed to play. One afternoon, sitting on my worn recliner with a tattered quilt draped over my lap, Anna entered with a radiant smile that blindsided me. I noticed the glint in her eye, something between eagerness and desperation. My heart sank. The air crackled with anticipation as she sat across from me, and it felt like the world lost its color. She laid out her plan, the meticulous details rolling off her tongue with an unsettling ease. She had found an investor for the beach house, someone willing to pay a handsome sum if she could secure the funds quickly. And then, in a voice that echoed with an alien tone, she proposed I sell my house to provide the money needed. I felt the weight of her words crash around me, every syllable a stone dropped into the serene pond of my heart. Sell my home? The walls that held years of memories. The garden I had nurtured with love and care. It was as if she was asking me to relinquish my entire past. How could she not see that this was more than a home to me? But as I gazed into her hopeful face, I was struck by the realization of what was truly being asked of me. It wasn't just about the house. It was about a trade, a cold transaction that stripped away any semblance of familial love and replaced it with a stark, utilitarian calculation. I would be traded for a dream that wasn't even mine. In that moment, something deep inside me shifted. It was no longer about the beach house or the money. It was about the respect I had believed my daughter held for me. I looked into Anna's eyes, and I saw not the girl I raised with unconditional love, but a stranger driven by ambition and self-interest. The hurt wrapped around my heart like a tight noose, and I realized that in her eyes I was merely a stepping stone to her own happiness. It was a revelation that shattered the illusion of our bond. The love we had shared seemed to fade as she continued to pitch her plan, and all I could think of was how easily she had traded my dignity for her dreams. Finally, I mustered the strength to speak, my voice trembling but firm. "Anna, I can't do that." There was a silence, a thick fog of disbelief hanging between us. I could see her mask of enthusiasm crack slightly, the surprise morphing into a frown, then anger. "Mom, think about it. You could be so happy. Imagine the ocean breeze, the sunsets." But as she painted her vision, I could only feel the walls of my heart fortify. I had given so much, and now at this juncture, I was determined to reclaim my worth. My life was not a bargaining chip, nor was my love a commodity to be traded. I would not let her greed redefine who I was or what our relationship meant to me. I can still recall the day my daughter, Marcy, took me to the beach house for the first time. The salty breeze about my face felt refreshing, even if I didn't truly understand the purpose of the trip. I was already old, after all, and my mind had started to wander down the paths of memory, each one more nostalgic and bittersweet than the last. She had spent so long talking about this little slice of paradise she wanted to own, a dream that seemed to glow brighter each time she spoke of it. But as I stepped onto that deck for the first time, the beginning of my own invisible chains were being forged. It was only later that I learned the truth behind that visit. Marcy had made a choice, one that tangled her ambitions with my existence. The beach house would become a bargaining chip, a shiny token in negotiations with her husband, who was just as interested in the idea of escape as she was. My presence became a liability in their eyes. The very home I helped to create with my love and sacrifices was as easily forsaken as an outdated piece of furniture. They perceived me as a burden instead of a person, a calculation devoid of sentiment. I never envisioned my own flesh and blood would reduce my life to mere financial gain. The community's reactions were varied but predictable. Some friends tried to rally around me, offering empty platitudes and feigned concern. "You're lucky to have a beach house in the family," they'd say, not recognizing the subtle knife twisting in my chest. They did not witness the late-night phone calls or the moments of silence at family dinner tables, where I was not just absent from the conversation, but actively erased from it like an old photograph faded with time. There were whispers, too, gossip that traveled like wildfire through our small town, with neighbors clucking their tongues in disapproval or pity. I became the cautionary tale that everyone loved to discuss. A tragic story, but one they were glad hadn't happened to them. Marcy would smile on the surface, called it tough love, while I retreated into the shadows of my own home, my once happy sanctuary, now a prison cell lined with memories of better days. Time and again I found myself peering out the window, watching families at the beach, joyously splashing in the waves while I remained stuck inside, my heart aching for connection. Each splash of water seemed to echo the breaking of bonds that I thought could never shatter. My friends would come to visit occasionally, but how they looked at me, pitying glances that betrayed their belief that I was now a lost cause. They thought I was simply a shadow of my former self, but I was still here, still fighting to hold on to the pieces of my being that mattered. I cannot say it was easy to reconcile my feelings towards my daughter, nor to understand how she could trade away the love and support I had given her for something material. I felt neglected, cast aside like yesterday's news. My love had not changed, but her priorities had. As I sit reflecting on those moments, I wonder how she became blind to the love that had grown between the two of us. She was my little girl once, her laughter a beautiful melody that still reverberates in my mind. But now, it feels like that melody belongs to another life, one where I was essential, not expendable. I question if she ever truly understood what it meant to have a family, one that didn't come with strings attached or a price tag. I often sit in my old armchair, its fabric frayed and faded, and look out the window toward the ocean. The waves used to sing to me. They whispered secrets and tales of adventure during my youth. I recall how my daughter, Lily, would come and sit beside me, her laughter bright and unwavering. We dreamed together of seaside mornings, collecting shells, and building sandcastles that, in our youthful naivety, we believed could withstand the tide. Now, the ocean feels more like a distant memory, something I can see but cannot touch, much like my daughter's affection for me, which has become elusive in the wake of her decisions. It was never supposed to come to this, to be traded for a slice of paradise. When I found out about Lily's plan to sell my home, the home I had spent years filling with love and memories, it felt as if the ground vanished beneath my feet. She spoke of the beach house with such fervor, as though it was a prize, not just for her, but for our entire family. "Mom, this is a good investment," she said, her tone dripping with the kind of excitement I hadn't heard in years. I wished she could have invested that enthusiasm in the time we could have shared together, sitting on that same beach, not letting life slip through our fingers like grains of sand. What struck me the hardest was not just the act, but the realization that I had become a burden in her eyes. Once, I was her guiding light, the person she turned to for comfort and wisdom. Now, I felt like an obstacle to her dreams. I tried to explain the value of family, of memories, of love, but each word seemed to fade away, lost in the ocean of her desires. It's hard to admit that I felt like an afterthought in the life I had devoted myself to nurturing. I had fought my fears for years, but now I was confronting a new terror, being an inconvenience to the people I cherished most. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that neglect takes many forms. It's not only about ignoring the elderly, it's about turning your back when they need you most. The way Lily spoke, as if the family home was a mere asset to be liquidated, left a jagged scar in my heart. I began questioning my worth in her life. Had I provided so little that she could weigh my existence against her desire for a beach house? The days blurred together as I wrestled with these questions, and I longed for clarity amidst the chaos of my emotions. I began to reflect on my own decisions as a mother, my own shortcomings, and whether my choices had led us to this crossroads. In those quiet moments, sitting in my chair, I started to rediscover parts of myself that I thought were long buried. I sifted through old photographs, uncovering snapshots of Lily as a child, her face bright with joy, her eyes gleaming with wonder. It reminded me of the connections we once had, those simple moments when our hearts were unified in love. I realized that my identity couldn't be defined solely by my daughter's choices. I still held stories of my life to tell, laughter to share, and wisdom to pass on. I could still gather the pieces of my soul and reclaim my narrative, regardless of the choices that others had made. Perhaps if I could show Lily that love extends beyond material things, I could rekindle what once felt unbreakable between us. I sat in my favorite chair, the one that faced the window overlooking my garden, a place that had been my sanctuary for many years. Outside, the autumn leaves were falling, their vibrant colors reminding me of days gone by, infused with warmth and laughter, or at least they had been before my daughter's betrayal. I used to find solace in that view, but now it only served as a painful reminder of what I had lost. The garden that nourished my spirit was now a mirror reflecting the decay of my relationships, particularly with my daughter, who had traded me for a beach house. She didn't just give me up. She exchanged my love and care for a plot of land, bricks, and mortar that could never return her affection. The act itself was shocking. Yet somehow, deep down, I felt I had always been preparing for it. Sheltering her from the realities of life had been my default, driven by the belief that family bonds were forged in love. But as her appetite for material wealth grew, it became glaringly obvious that our relationship was precarious. I remember holding her as a child, whispering promises of unconditional love, and believing wholeheartedly that those words would build an unbreakable bond. Yet here I was, watching her shuffle me aside for a vision of her future that excluded me. It was a betrayal that felt like a stab to my heart, leaving a wound that would not heal. To come to terms with this loss, I had to sift through memories, both sweet and sour. I recalled the moments when life had been simpler, when laughter filled the air, and we shared secret jokes over dinner. Yet, those memories seemed to fade into the background noise of her ambitions. Even as I tried to reach out, she would either ignore my calls or respond with monosyllabic texts about how busy she was. I understood busy. I had raised her amidst the whirlwind of life, but now it felt as if I was merely an obligation in her carefully curated world. It was disheartening, knowing that my existence had been diminished to that of an inconvenient detail rather than a cherished memory. As hard as it was to accept, I realized that our paths might diverge permanently. While I ached for a reconciliation, I knew life was often more complex than that. Forgiving her, if only for my own peace of mind, began to take precedence over my desire for her to acknowledge the hurt she'd caused. I considered how I might communicate this resolution to her without dragging our histories into the conversation. I drafted letters in my mind, words swirling around until they formed shimmers of hope, but the thought of sending them felt daunting, as if I were reaching out into an abyss with no certainty of what I might find on the other side. In the end, I chose to write her a simple note. I expressed my love for her, even amidst the deep hurt, and told her I would always be here if she wanted to talk. I left it on her doorstep, a message floating between us like a fragile bridge. I wasn't sure what it would lead to. Would she pick it up, read it, and feel remorse? Or would it gather dust like so many of my heartfelt attempts to connect? Regardless, I came to understand that genuine resolution didn't necessarily hinge on reconciliation. Sometimes, simply letting go and wishing the other person well was enough to mend the frayed edges of my own heart. As I looked at the leaves swirling in the crisp air, I found a bittersweet peace, knowing I had done what I could. I sat in the worn recliner that had been my companion for years, the soft, faded fabric a testament to countless afternoons spent lost in memories. The early evening sun poured through the window, casting a warm glow across the room, but it felt foreign, unwelcoming. Today, I wasn't just dealing with the weight of my age, I was carrying the burden of betrayal, the kind that pierces deeper than any physical ailment. It wasn't my failing eyesight or the aches in my joints that troubled me. It was the sense of abandonment, a gnawing emptiness that filled the air like a heavy fog, threatening to suffocate the last flickering embers of my spirit. With each tick of the clock, I remembered the days when my daughter, Clara, was a little girl, her laughter ringing through the halls of our home. I had poured my heart into raising her, nurturing her dreams, and guiding her through the trials of childhood. Yet, years later, I felt as though I had become an unwanted weight, an obstacle in her path, rather than the support I always envisioned myself to be. Clara had spoken with such excitement about the beach house, how it would transform her life, how it would be the perfect escape for her family. I had never imagined that it would come at my expense, that the love I had given so freely would turn into a mere transaction as she traded my care for a piece of property. It was clear now that she saw me as a burden, a relic of her past. The thought twisted inside me like a knife, and I often found myself looking at old family photos, searching for the traces of the girl I once knew. The innocence in her smile, the sparkle in her eyes. Where had it all gone? In its place was a woman blinded by ambition, willing to sacrifice her own mother for the allure of a glamorous lifestyle. I had even offered to sell my modest home to contribute to the purchase of the beach house, thinking it would help us bond again. But that only seemed to intensify the need for her escape. It wasn't the loss of the beach house that hurt me most. It was the quiet acknowledgement that I had been replaced by something far less meaningful. I began to collect the remnants of my life, old letters, photographs, and even the locket I had once gifted Clara, a token of our unbreakable bond. I decided to create a small box, a symbolic gesture to hold on to the fragments of my past and the love that had once defined us. As I placed each item inside, I felt a bittersweet sense of closure. Perhaps this was my final act of love for Clara, a way to show her that even in my sorrow, I still hoped for her happiness. I imagined her reaction when she found the box, a tangible reminder of what we had shared. In that moment, I realized I wasn't ready to give up on her entirely, even if she had given up on me. So, I wrote a letter, pouring my heart into every word, acknowledging the hurt, but also expressing my enduring love, hoping she would see the value of our relationship beyond the material. I left the box in the living room, a silent challenge to the life she had chosen. If nothing else, I wanted her to know that while she could trade me for a beach house, the memories we created together could never be replaced. This was my final gesture, a flicker of hope that perhaps, in time, Clara would come to understand the true cost of her choice. As I sit here in my small but cozy room, the walls painted a faded shade of lavender that once brought me joy. I find myself reflecting on the intricate tapestry of my life. There are moments that stand out, bright and vibrant, while others, like the quiet corners of this room, seem to fade away into the shadows. It's funny how time filters memories, allowing only fragments to linger while pushing the more painful ones deep into the recesses of my mind. I think about my daughter, Laura, and how life has twisted our relationship into something I could scarcely recognize. The beach house that once symbolized joy and warmth has now become a painful reminder of the price of neglect and greed. For years, I devoted myself to nurturing her dreams. From the moment she was born, I poured my heart into every moment, every scraped knee, every late-night homework session, every whispered secret during sleepless nights. I could never have foreseen how that love would one day be rendered trivial in the face of material desire. When Laura decided to trade me away for something as glitzy as a beach house, I was devastated, not just because of the betrayal, but because it unmasked the depth of her yearning for something she thought would bring her happiness. I imagine her living in that house, the waves crashing against the shore, oblivious to the reality that true happiness cannot be bought or acquired through possession. There is an ugly truth behind the sweetness of family ties, and I've come to learn that sometimes those ties can constrict rather than uplift. I often reflect on how I've been reduced to a mere transaction, a commodity in the eyes of the one person who used to cherish me the most. It stings, even now, as I look out at the vibrant sunset through my window, knowing that for Laura, the sunset view from that beach house is far more compelling than any memory of me. I sit with this reality, feeling the weight of neglect settle upon me like a heavy blanket. I allowed my love to be manipulated, thinking it would shield me from harm, but I was simply left vulnerable and alone. Yet, as I reflect on what I've lost, I also find unexpected strength in the solitude of my situation. The quiet hours in this room have taught me to reconnect with my own needs, my own desires, for the first time in a long while. I recall fondly the days spent gardening, how each flower I nurtured became a small triumph against the harshness of life. I remember the smell of fresh earth and the feeling of sun on my face, and in these memories, I find glimmers of hope. Perhaps my life can still bloom, even among the thorns of neglect. There's an undeniable resilience that surfaces from deep within, urging me to forge a path toward healing, regardless of the road I have traveled so far. In these final reflections, as I pause to take stock of my journey, I remind myself that I am not defined by the way others choose to view me or treat me. I will not let their greed overshadow the essence of who I am. Perhaps this is not the end of my story, but rather a new beginning, a chance to reclaim my dignity and explore the beauty that this life still holds for me. I may have experienced the bitter sting of betrayal, yet I refuse to let it color every minute of my existence. I am more than the sum of my losses. I am a woman with experiences worth cherishing, a heart capable of love still, and a spirit that refuses to be extinguished. As I look ahead, I vow to embrace this newfound strength and navigate the path that lies before me with dignity, one step at a time. As I sit here in the gentle embrace of twilight, the shadows of my past dance like autumn leaves on the wind. My heart is both heavy and light, a curious paradox of emotions that only age can bestow. I think back on the diary, those fragile pages filled with my most intimate thoughts and dreams, lost to time and traded for brick and mortar. Yet, like the tide that ceaselessly caresses the shore, I have come to understand that life is an exchange, often bittersweet. In the quiet moments, I find solace in the memories of laughter shared, the warmth of hugs that linger long after the embrace fades. I realize that my worth was never tied to a piece of paper, but to the love I poured into my family, the stories I told, and the lessons I lived. My daughter chose her path, one that I might not have walked, but it led me here, to this moment of reflection, of acceptance. The beach house may have taken my diary, but it could never capture the essence of who I am. Time moves forward, relentless and beautiful, and as I bid farewell to the chapters of yesterday, I embrace the unwritten ones of tomorrow. I hope that, in their own journeys, my family finds the treasures I've tucked away in my heart, just as I continue to root for them from afar. If you listened until the end, thank you. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. Maybe the next story we tell here will be yours.